1966, two titans of American culture were brought into the world. The Bob Fosse-directed Neil Simon musical Sweet Charity made its Broadway debut, that'll become relevant, I promise, and the television series Mission Impossible, created by Bruce Geller, hit the airwaves.
Good morning, Mr. Briggs.
The TV show about a team of highly capable spies ran for 171 episodes across 7 seasons in its original run, and then an additional 35 episodes when it came back in 1988 for 2 final seasons, before Paramount Pictures took the show from the small screen to the big screen with the 1996 spy thriller Mission Impossible.
This tape will self-destruct in 5 seconds.
That film would figuratively light the fuse and spark what is quite possibly, in my opinion, the greatest film franchise of all time.
Light the fuse.
Yeah. From humble beginnings as a TV show shot on backlots in the Valley of Los Angeles, the now 7-film franchise with some of the most talented creative minds behind its multiple wheels has only gotten better with time and finds new ways to jump over the monolithic bar it sets for itself again and again.
No!
It's got everything. Spies, explosions, insane stunts, amazing car chases, swanky parties, exploding motorcycles, running, disguises, globetrotting, more running, Paula Patton's arms, self-destructing messages, gadgets, close-up magic, even more running, a really cool record store, Tom Wilkinson, nuclear threats, biological threats, so many threats, and nearly all of it is carried on the shoulders of one strangely fascinating man who is fighting tooth and nail to keep cinema alive.
It's a movie!
There's so many things that make this franchise great, but I think filmmaker Patrick Willems can sum it up pretty quickly.
It rules. It's the best shit ever.
And with the 8th and potentially final film of the franchise, Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning, hitting theaters this May, we figured what better time to break down the world and cinematic timeline of Mission Impossible.
I need you to trust me. One last time.
It also gives me a reason to rewatch these movies for like the 50th time. I love them so much. The way this works is we're going to be taking a trip through the events of the Mission Impossible universe and fill in some details along the way that might have slipped by you or that you just didn't even know existed. Like Ethan's major in college. We'll get to it. For clarity's sake, this is not a video about what year the movies were released. Here they are, just in case you wanted that information. I don't know, so many of these videos I find on YouTube are just like, here's a timeline, and then it just tells you the year that a movie was released. Anyway, to chart this course, I'll be relying on a few sources, mainly the 7 feature films Mission Impossible 1, 2, and 3, Ghost Protocol, Rogue Nation, Fallout, and Dead Reckoning. There was never a part 1 in that title. Never happened. Ignore it. We'll also be using the film commentaries, behind the scenes, special features, cast and crew interviews, the Mission Impossible wikis and reddits, and some help from Drew Taylor and Charles Hood of the Light the Fuse podcast. This of course means there will be spoilers for the entire Mission Impossible franchise in this video. We're going deep on this one, folks. So if you haven't seen all of these movies, go fix that. Make a day of it. They're fantastic. Unlike other film franchises like Alien or Star Wars, there's not a ton of supplemental or expanded universe material for Mission Impossible. The TV show will factor in, but only very lightly, and we won't be including the comic series from 1967 or any of the video games, because they're all bad. Also, if you decide to Google Mission Impossible books, you're gonna find a lot of steamy spy thrillers by author Jackie Dalecki, which, if that's your thing, nice. Basically, I went over these movies with a fine-tooth comb and several Long Island iced teas to help you get caught up on the fantabulous adventures of Agent Ethan Hunt and the Impossible Mission Force. But first, before we go to the timeline breakdown, I figured it wouldn't hurt to have a bit of history on the Impossible Mission Force and where it came from. If you want to get straight to the action, you could jump to this time code for the start of the timeline. I totally won't be upset if you skip this section. As I stated earlier, the Mission Impossible TV series started in 1966. That's slightly important because even though the show is mostly divorced from the films, there are a few small threads connecting them.
The IMF has operated without oversight for 40 years.
Chairman.
Now, are its methods unorthodox?
Mr.
Yes.
Chairman.
Are its results less than perfect? Absolutely.
Created by Bruce Geller, no relation to Ross, Mission Impossible aired on CBS in September of 1966. It featured a cast of agents who would do the impossible missions the CIA just couldn't handle. The TV show featured actor Stephen Hill as the lead character, Colonel Briggs. No, not that one.
No, achievement is its own reward.
Briggs was the founding member and team leader of the Impossible Mission Force, or the IMF for short. Briggs assembled a team of agents from his former squad after he was honorably discharged from the Army, and became Major Domo of all Missions Impossible. This changed over seasons, with Stephen Hill only starring in the first season of the show before he left, and was replaced by the character Jim Phelps, played by Peter Graves. You probably know him from Airplane.
You like movies about gladiators?
Do you think Peter Graves ever ended a fight by saying, "You've made a Graves mistake"? Probably. The team consisted of agents with special skill sets like technologist Barney Collier, honeypot expert Cinnamon Carter, the man of a million faces Roland Hand, and team hunk Willie Armitage. The cast changed throughout the seasons and added actors like Leonard Nimoy and a mustacheless Sam Elliott later on. Wait, hold on a second. There we go. The show also had the occasional guest stars like Eartha Kitt, Cameron Mitchell, and Ed Asner. Some great one-episode roles, but nowhere near as good as Columbo guest stars, but that's a pretty big trench coat to fill out. It was a 1960s TV show about spies, so a lot of the episodes were Cold War adjacent, with the team thwarting Russian plots and traveling to fake Eastern European villages and Spanish-speaking countries, which were really just Burbank, California. For example, one of the earliest episodes is about stopping a dictator of a Caribbean island named Santa Costa, which isn't real, from launching nukes. Sure, Santa Costa is also the neighborhood where the Charm Sisters live. That's unrelated, but it would have driven me crazy if I didn't mention it. The show also introduced a lot of the major staples of the film franchise. Mask being a big one, fun little gadgets, the opening credits montage, judo chops.
Judo chop! Always good. Judo chop!
Wrong spy. And of course the killer theme from composer Lalo Schifrin, which has been used or recomposed in some way across the entire series. The final episode of the rebooted series aired in 1990, and it ended on a pretty note. The episode is about a museum curator killing Egyptian politicians in an attempt to resurrect an ancient death cult. The impossible mission of stopping a man who would be bullied by teenagers.
Prepare for the ceremony!
Despite the show wrapping up on a very mummy-heavy episode, it conveniently leads directly into our main timeline. Our first point on our cinematic timeline starts all the way back in 1964 with the birth of the most impossible man, Ethan Hunt. Born on August 18th to parents Margaret and Nathan on a family farm in Madison, Wisconsin, Ethan developed a talent for disguises during his childhood. That is, if you're going off the Ethan Hunt dossier that's in the DVD menu of Mission Impossible from 1996. That dossier is much different than the file we see on Ethan in Fallout a few years later. According to the dossier from the 1996 film, Ethan attended college at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, safety school, and he double majored in linguistics and drama before attending the CIA Training Academy in Langley, Virginia. Which means for 5 films, the greatest spy in the world, capable of doing the most impossible things, was a theater major.
You have no idea what it's like to be me.
At Langley, Ethan became close friends with his roommate and eventual IMF teammate, Jack Harmon, and Ethan caught the attention of Jim Phelps by being a silly little stinker. According to the DV dossier, Ethan disguised himself as a commanding officer of the academy and did not shake the hands of any of the agents being promoted during their graduation ceremony. Pretty good bit. Phelps thought it was such a good prank that he recruited Ethan for a mission in Versailles, France, and then made him a permanent member of Phelps' iteration of the IMF. That backstory clashes with what we learned in the later films. I figured it's best to get the choice discussion out of the way now.
The choice?
The 1996 dossier describes Ethan as a theater kid, which would explain all the close-up magic, but the information we learn in Fallout and Dead Reckoning more or less nixes pretty much all of that. His birth date is the same, but that's about it. Instead of being a drama student from Wisconsin, Ethan served in the Army and attended the University of Pennsylvania as a double major in international relations and engineering. The Madison Playhouse production of Pirates of Penzance surely struggled without him. The Fallout dossier also states that Ethan was recruited into the IMF under Colonel Briggs, not Jim Phelps. And instead of being recruited for being a goose expert like the 96 dossier suggests, Ethan was given the choice of joining the IMF or spending his life in a jail cell, following events that we'll get to very shortly. The choice paints the IMF as an organization that will occasionally recruit people with extraordinary skills who are also in some kind of life, death, or jail situation.
At one time or another, each of us was in a similar situation to yours.
And each of us was offered the choice.
Which, if that's the case, how did Benji get involved?
I think I like my job, okay, a lot.
I know some fans of these movies don't love the choice angle, but we're going to work within the boundaries of what Fallout and Dead Reckoning have retconned to some extent, simply because there's information on screen and in the film's plot for us to track. The dossier from the first movie is fun, but there's also no hard dates on any of the events aside from Ethan's date of birth. That doesn't mean the theater references are going to stop. Strap in. Our next point on the timeline doesn't have a confirmed year to go off of. In situations like this, we'll be using NCY, or no confirmed year. It's a franchise about spies, like 90% of everything is redacted on screen. What do you want from me? Sometime before or after the events of the 1988 series, the Phineas Freak himself, Luther Stickle, joins the IMF under the command of Colonel Briggs. He would later become a disavowed agent for reasons unknown. It might be because he was the only person to ever hack NATO GhostCom,
The only man alive who actually hacked NATO GhostCom.
or because the CIA enacted a dress code that said no hats. There's no information on when Luther up and left the IMF, but it was probably sometime between 1983 and the early 90s, since he earned the nickname the Net Ranger.
What did they used to call you, the Net Ranger?
And the official birth date of the internet is January 1st, 1983. We're now going to jump ahead 10 years to 1993 when Ethan is taken into custody in an undisclosed Spanish-speaking country following the murder of Marie at the hands of Gabriel, who most likely framed Ethan for it and got him thrown in jail on March 27th. This is the same day that Ethan was given the choice, most likely from Colonel Briggs.
30 years ago, you were offered the choice. Join the IMF or spend your life in prison.
Tiny sidebar, but a lot of websites use this scene as reference for Ethan joining the IMF, which does show Tom Cruise talking to Colonel Briggs actor Stephen Hill, but is from the 1993 film The Firm by director Sidney Pollack.
Fake.
Yes. Fake.
Go watch The Firm, it rules. It's like 8 hours long and has every character actor on Earth in it, and it has one of the best Cruise running performances in all of his movies. He closes a 100-yard gap on Gene Triplehorn in like 12 seconds. It's insane. And that takes us right up to the start of Ethan's very long and impossible journey. There's a small section of time before our first big stop here where Ethan is on assignment in France and recruits his college friend Sarah Davies to join the IMF. That information is only expressed in the 96 dossier and nowhere in the film, so we're going to throw a no confirmed year on that too. We join Ethan and his team consisting of Jack Harmon, Claire Phelps, and Hannah Willems, who are in Kiev on March 12, 1996, in the Brian De Palma directed Mission Impossible. The team is doing a whole big dead lady ruse to get the name of a contact in Minsk from a Russian criminal before they're called to Prague and meet up with Jim Phelps, played in this movie by very serious actor Jon Voight. Their mission is to intercept a rogue asset in Prague who plans to sell a NOC list which was stolen from the CIA. NOC stands for Non-Official Cover List, which basically links field agents to their codenames if both halves of the list are used together, kinda like the recipe for Coca-Cola. The operation is going smoothly enough until Jack gets Elisha Otis and the rest of the team besides Ethan bite the dust thanks to an ambush that they never saw coming, which I guess is the definition of an ambush. It'll be a few more films until we really get the fully painted picture of what motivates Ethan Hunt to do what he does, but this event cements both Ethan and the franchise's underlying ethos, friendship. Okay, it's really about how Ethan will never let anything bad happen to the people who are close to him and the insane toll that takes, because being close to him is dangerous on its own, but within all of that, friendship.
What's up, baby?
Hey, man.
Just listen to the commentaries with Cruise and McHugh if you don't believe me. They love each other.
This was one of the first gags we came up with for the chase.
Great stuff, McHugh.
Oh, well, thank you.
Fun.
Everything goes belly up. Ethan rendezvous with Eugene Kittredge, who has been in Prague the whole time.
Okay, location green, 1 hour. I'll be there myself.
You're in Prague?
And is having dinner at a restaurant that is an absolute nightmare for people who are afraid of the ocean. It turns out that Kittredge and his second team were already in Prague and swarming all over that swanky party because the IMF appears to have a mole problem. So of course they target the theater kid.
You're worried about me. Why?
After some sloppy IMF missions the past 2 years and an intercepted check from the anonymous arms dealer Max, Kittredge turns his sight on Phelps and company.
This whole operation was smart. Yeah.
And with Ethan's whole team dead and him alive, and his family's farm receiving a mysterious influx of money from an unknown entity, it puts him in a real tough spot.
I can understand you're very upset.
Kittredge, you've never seen me very upset.
After raising the restaurant's insurance rate and exploding this dude out a f***ing window, woo! Ethan makes his way back to the safe house and tries to log on to watch The Sopranos before he remembers his Bible stories and sends possibly hundreds of emails in different languages to different email addresses in the hope of getting in touch with Max. He must be doing it for hours because he hallucinates a Jon Voight who had way too much barbecue.
Ethan.
This turns out to be Claire Phelps, who didn't die in a car explosion despite what Ethan saw.
Shut up! I saw you. You were in the car.
Ethan and Claire are disavowed and on the lam, but thankfully Ethan's email roulette pays off and they get a response from Max. Deciding the best way out is through, Ethan sets up a meeting with Max, played by Stone Cold Killer Vanessa Redgrave.
Who are you and what are you doing here?
After discovering that the knock list that she received from the mysterious mole known as Job was a phony, Ethan strikes a deal to steal the full knock list for Max as long as Job is at the handoff. The only problem is the full knock list is deep inside CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia.
The actual list is secure at Langley.
Only able to turn to other disavowed agents for help, Ethan and Claire recruit the previously referenced Luther Stickle and Franz Krieger, a man with resting villain face and an intense fear of rats. Calm down. After some municipal cosplay and dousing the analyst with poop juice, Ethan does the thing. The wire thing. You know the thing. We all know the thing. Show the thing. It's great. Ethan retrieves the knock list, and after jetting to England, Krieger reveals himself to be untrustworthy because, obviously. Ethan then entrusts the list to Luther because everybody loves Luther.
What makes you trust me?
Because if you knew what you were getting into, you never would have done it.
And then, surprise, Ethan runs into a mostly not dead Jim Phelps at the airport when he's dunking on Kittredge. Jim paints Kittredge as the real mole while we see what actually happened that night in Prague, where the entire IMF team was killed by Jim, Krieger, and Claire, setting Ethan up as the scapegoat. This is why you never trust weird married couples that work together. It's either going to be a leggings scam or they're going to kill your entire covert spy team. Ethan plays along, cuts Jim in on the deal with Max, and after everyone's on the train headed to Paris, Claire gets hoodwinked by the most dangerous drama student ever and outs herself as Jim's co-conspirator. Existing as a character in the Mission Impossible universe and seeing someone reach for the back of their neck like this has got to drive your heart rate like through the roof. Ethan reveals Jim's not dead status to Kittredge, and Jim responds by shooting his wife.
Don't, Jim.
Don't, Jim.
Peter Graves would never. Ethan heads to the roof of the train where Phelps is trying to catch a ride on an adorable helicopter piloted by Krieger, but you can only push a theater major so far. It's pretty incredible how well this whole sequence from 1996 holds up. A really spectacular combination of practical and computer effects coming together just beautifully. It also probably helps that it's set on a train. Train movies are great. What do you think about train movies, Patrick?
Train movies f***ing rock.
Ethan teaches Krieger about American traffic lights before he blows the chopper to smithereens and turns Jim Phelps into pate. Afterwards, Ethan and Luther's disavowed status is revoked, and just when he thought he could relax on a flight that still had smoking sections, Ethan is back to work on another IMF assignment.
Would you consider the cinema of the Caribbean?
Mission Impossible made a whopping $457 million at the box office on a budget of just $80 million, which guaranteed it a sequel. And hoo boy, what a sequel we got. The next movie on our timeline is the avant-garde erotica film that is Mission Impossible 2. Watch it and tell me I'm wrong. Mission Impossible 2 is a perfect example of two giant creative forces coming together at full speed and melding so poorly it explodes, like most things in this movie. Almost everything explodes. The script was written by prolific and lauded screenwriter Robert Towne, who also wrote the 1996 film. Towne took over writing duties from another esteemed screenwriter, William Goldman, who said that most of what was in his original script was thrown in the trash. Battlestar Galactica's Ronald D. Moore and Brandon Braga, who were both writers on Star Trek around this time, also snagged a story by credit. Their original draft was going to bring back actor Peter Lupus from the TV series to reprise his role as Willie Armitage. That, of course, didn't happen. Robert Towne's career was brilliant and filled with impressive credits and uncredited work on movies like The Parallax View, McCabe and Mrs. Miller, and Chinatown. Directing duties for this movie were handed to legendary Hong Kong action director John Woo. Cruise, who is also a producer on all of these movies, picked John Woo himself after watching Face Off. Which, like, yeah, how could you not? Woo's run of American films in the 90s is so short but fascinating and weird that it really deserves its own deep dive video. The style and energy of a lot of Woo's films has always been loud and fast and exciting, but he was on some bombastic Y2K in this one. His frenetic editing, his overly long vehicle sequences, and penchant for melodrama it's not a great fit for a sexy spy thriller about stopping a biological attack. I'm sorry. I still like it, but it's weird. That and he and Cruise didn't get along too well on set, one of the reasons being John Woo wanted to use stunt doubles for all the action sequences, but Tom refused.
Okay, cut! Out of Tom.
I stated this earlier, but a good chunk of these films are set within or close to the year of their release, We know that the events of Mission Impossible 2 take place in 1999 thanks to a newspaper that's dated March 22nd of that year, my birthday. Our first point in this section starts us in Sydney, Australia, where Dr. Vladimir Nekrovich records and sends a video message to the IMF for his friend Dmitri, which is one of Ethan's aliases out in the field. He warns them that the pharmaceutical company he's working for has forced him to create a virus known as Chimera, so they could profit off of the cure, Bellerophon, which is named after the hero from the Iliad. The good doctor injects himself with the virus, bringing the cure along with him, and pleads for Dmitri to travel with him from Sydney to Atlanta, and maybe they'll check out the Coca-Cola Museum while they're there. He also refers to Dmitri as an old friend.
I'm with an old friend now, Dmitri.
Which alludes to some interaction between the two sometime in between Ethan learning about the films of the Caribbean and going on vacation. Maybe he rented Ethan a costume at one time or another.
I think you forgot the mask.
I bet Roddy Jabergia gets sent the cake. Do people know about the Tom Cruise cake? His coconut cake? He sends this cake to people. I'm just like, Drew's had the cake. How's the cake, Drew?
It's good.
Gotta get that cake. Dmitri gets the message and meets with Vladimir on the flight to Atlanta. He then gasses everyone on board and snaps the doctor's neck. But why?
Why?
Well, because it's not Ethan, but Sean Ambrose, an IMF agent who's gone rogue, and steals Bellerophon before he skydives off the plane with Tom Cruise's cousin. During all of that, the real Ethan was rock climbing in Dead Horse Point, Utah, which is a really rad name for a town. The IMF is finally able to track Ethan down and rocket him some Oakleys, which tell him to travel to Seville, Spain to recruit professional thief Naya Nordalf Hall, which, bad character name. I keep wanting to say Nya every time it's on screen. That's how it's spelled. N-Y-A-H. After taking in some flamenco dancing, Ethan rendezvous with Mission Commander Swanbeck, who informs Ethan that Ambrose was tapped to stand in as Dmitri when the IMF couldn't find Ethan. Sean Ambrose is basically the evil version of Ethan Hunt.
Sean feels he hasn't done the job unless he leaves a lot of hats on the ground.
The dark to Ethan's light, the Starlight Express to Ethan's thoroughly modern Millie.
Raspberry!
I do like that John Woo had a trend of having his villains live together in really lush homes like they're rich couples who own horses. Anyway, Ambrose and Naya used to be a couple, according to Swanbeck, and the IMF believes the best way to learn what Chimera is, and what Ambrose is in possession of, is by using her as a bridge for Ethan to get to Ambrose.
You mean it'll be difficult?
Very.
Well, this is not mission difficult, Mr. Hunt. It's mission impossible.
Ethan heads to Sydney and is teamed up with Luther, of course, and one-and-done character Billy Baird. Helicopter pilots really just don't seem to hang around in this franchise. Except for the one. Ethan. There's a lot of spycraft going on, along with horse races and mask gambits, one of which tricks Brendan Gleeson into spilling the beans about Chimera, and then profit off of the cure. Typical CEO behavior. We also learned that Sean Ambrose is a dunce who destroyed one of the last two forms of the virus when he let the doctor's body burn up in the plane crash. There's also this scene that just always hits weird.
I've heard.
All I need to hear.
Ethan and Ambrose have a shootout in a laboratory that makes explosions and sparks, and then Naya injects herself with the last half of the virus to keep Mr. Douche from getting his hands on it, leaving Ethan just 20 hours to get her the antidote.
We've got 19 hours and 58 minutes! I'll get Bellerophon into your system before then!
And then John Woo just goes psycho mode for the last half hour. It f***ing rules. So good. There's the whole knife thing. Do people know about the knife thing? Go read about the knife thing. Here's the knife thing.
We put a cable on this thing, we stick it to a frame that's not gonna move. But anybody else wanna lay there with their eye open and let the thing stop a half inch or a quarter inch from their eye?
Ethan gets Naya the antidote just in time, and BAM! Sand gun. Eat farts, Ambrose. F***ing dork. With the Chimera virus completely destroyed, Ethan and Naya walk off past some fire jugglers in a crowded park and into their new life together. And they probably broke up because Ethan's idea of a vacation is this. Mission 2 Possible cleaned up at the box office, making $546 million worldwide when all was said and done. It was the highest grossing film of 2000 until it was knocked out of that spot by the Ron Howard drama, How the Grinch Stole Christmas.
Just keep it kind of loosey-goosey.
In 2002, development began on Mission Impossible 3 with John Woo not returning to direct. David Fincher, who was coming off of Panic Room, was tapped to helm the franchise. He would eventually step away from it to focus on Zodiac, which, smart move. And it didn't really sound like he wanted to be the third person to take a bite at this apple. In an interview from 2008, Fincher said, quote,
"I think the problem with third movies is the people who are financing them are experts on how they should be made and what they should be. At that point, when you own a franchise like that, you want to get rid of any extraneous opinions. I'm not the kind of person who says, let's see the last two. I see what you're going for. You'll never hear me say, whatever is easiest for you.
If you know anything about David Fincher's time working on Alien 3, it makes a lot of sense that he said no.
It's amazing to me that Fox is the #1 studio in the country because they're all such a bunch of morons.
Narc director Joe Carnahan was then brought in, but after some creative differences around the script arose, Carnahan stepped away as well. When I said Narc director, I meant he directed Narc, not that Joe Carnahan's a narc, as far as I know. Cruise then turned to former Steven Spielberg archivist Jeffrey Jacob Abrams to direct. Cruise handpicked Abrams after he binge-watched 2 whole seasons of the show Alias.
It was up at about 2 in the morning one night, and I'm gonna watch Alias. So I just started watching Alias. I was blown away by what he accomplished.
There's a gap of about 7 years, give or take, between the events of Mission Impossible 2 and Mission Impossible 3. We don't really know much about what went on during that time. We know that Ethan retired from field duty at some point and has become a trainer for IMF recruits, including his protege, Lindsay Ferris. He's also gotten engaged. His fiancée Julia Mead, who happens to be a normal person, a nurse who has no clue what Ethan's real job actually is.
Department of Transportation.
I've been there over 10 years now.
We pick up with Ethan living the suburban life, making martinis, hanging out with Aaron Paul and Greg Grunberg. It's pretty good stuff. During a snack run, he's approached by IMF Director of Operations and professional jagoff John Musgrave. Musgrave and a disposable camera inform Ethan that Lindsay Ferris has been in Germany investigating an arms dealer and has run into a bit of trouble during her assignment. Trouble with a capital T, and that rhymes with D, and that stands for Davian. Owen Davian, played by the incredible Philip Seymour Hoffman. Mwah, miss you. Movies haven't been the same. Ethan jumps back into the field with a team of hotties consisting of agents Jen Lee, Declan Gormley, and of course...
Now if it isn't Mr. Those Who Can't Do, Teach.
They're dispatched to Berlin to rescue Ferris, which has a lot of shaky camera work, shootouts, exploding helicopters, and exploding heads. The team discovers that Davian's goons put a small exploding capsule into Ferris's head, which goes off before Ethan can short-circuit it and save her.
Thank you.
It's genuinely one of, if not the most startling and disturbing moments of the entire franchise. And it's the second cruelest thing J.J. Abrams did to Kerry Russell since they cut Felicity's hair. Like f***ing Jay Leno, Jesus. After Ethan and Admiral Face get chewed out by IMF director Teddy Brassel, Ethan and Luther learn about the MacGuffin only known as the Rabbit's Foot from Benji.
Rabbit's Foot. Yeah, well, I'm assuming it's like a code word for something he's about to sell to an unspecified buyer.
And that Davian's going to be in Rome for a gala event at the Vatican, which I didn't know was a thing. The only thing impossible for the IMF is turning down a gala event. They love a reason to get dressed up. They're sluts for it. Ethan tells Julia that he's got to go away and that he can't tell her where he's going, but also convinces her to marry him somehow. Big red flag situation, Julia. The team heads to Italy to snatch Davian with the help of some mask work and try to figure out what exactly is this rabbit's foot that Ferris got popped over. After some fun spy jinx. Has anyone copyrighted spy jinx? Trademark. After some fun spy jinx that could lead to a 3-way makeout.
È tutto perfetto. Mille grazie. Vabbè, dai, non c'è problema.
Ethan, Luther, and the crew make their entrances, with Ethan in disguise as Davian. Just taking a moment to appreciate how great this mask oneer is, it's really solid. Same thing goes for Hoffman's cruise mannerisms. Ethan gets the drop on Davian in a bathroom and pulls a Texas switch to smuggle him out, and then they fake his death with the help of a car explosion.
Do it.
Aboard their plane, Ethan begins to interrogate Davian, and then he gets served just some grade A steak from the Hoffman buffet.
I'm gonna make her bleed and cry and call out your name. And you're not gonna be able to do
Mwah. Ethan responds to this by almost dropping Davian out of the plane before knocking him back to coach, and then he learns that he's not as much of a ghost as he thinks he is.
Ethan.
Back in the US, Luther manages to finally decrypt a digital microdot that Ferris sent to Ethan before she was captured, and the two learn that Brassel is possibly working with Davian.
The call to Davian came from Brassel's office.
Just in time for the set piece in the middle of Act 2 to kick off. A drone, a chopper, and a buttload of foreign mercenaries attack the motorcade and extract Davian in their wake. Julia gets pinched by Davian's goon, and Ethan is given 48 hours to return Davian's briefcase to him, otherwise Julia is as good as Ferris. Before he can activate hunt mode though, Brassel has Ethan brought in. I know it's to keep him from biting, but I'd like to believe that they had a gag on Ethan because he's just too charismatic of an actor and has to be silenced, like he's the devil or something. Musgrave mouths the secret message to Ethan, helping him escape. Ethan then dresses like me in college and hitches a flight to Shanghai, where he links up with the team and starts setting up plans to get the Rabbit's Foot.
And if you made it to the rooftop, took out the guards and got the Rabbit's Foot, you can't just walk out of the lobby. What's your exit?
Base jump off the top. I need to shoot.
Ethan literally swings into action to steal the Rabbit's Foot, and things go not great during the heist. We never see what happens to Ethan on the inside unless you watch the deleted scene that came with the DVD, but outside of that, we got nothing. The trailer for Final Reckoning does hint that we'll possibly find out what exactly happened inside the facility though. Ethan and the rabbit's foot get picked up by Mr. Bowlcut, and he downs some sleepy horny juice before he wakes up to the news of a charge in his brain and the sight of Julia on the business end of an angry Davian.
I'm gonna count to 10. You're gonna tell me where the rabbit's foot is. Or she dies.
And then we're treated to another hearty dish of Hoffman, just mwah, 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 mwah.
You don't think I'll do it? Where is it?
Look at me.
Where the hell is it?
Look at me. Stay with me.
Seven!
I am gonna kill you. I swear to God, I'm gonna.
Eight!
A few moments of mental and emotional trauma later, Musgrave reveals that, surprise, Julia isn't really dead, and he's been the mole working with Davian all along. Musgrave offers to exchange Julia's safety for the evidence-filled microdot that Lindsay sent to Ethan.
What was in Lindsay's message?
And then we see why they had a Hannibal Lecter gag on Ethan. With some help from Benji, Ethan gets his steps in and tracks down Julia just as Davian activates the countdown clock in Ethan's skull. Even with an explosive charge about to go off in his head, Ethan cannot be stopped. He introduces Davian to the grill of a truck, and then rides the lightning to short-circuit out the bomb in his skull. And he's just certain he'll come back to life, like he's Destiny Manifest or something.
Hunt is the living manifestation of destiny.
We're not there yet. Julia pops Musgrave's goofy ass as he tries to leave with the rabbit's foot, and then resuscitates Ethan. After his literal death experience, Ethan comes clean to Julia and tells her that he works for the IMF.
What does that stand for?
Impossible Mission Force.
Shut up.
Which, like, at this point, what lie could you possibly come up with? Gambling debts, I don't know. We wrap up this chapter as Ethan hands off the rabbit's foot to Brassel for safekeeping, and then he and Julia head out for a much-needed honeymoon after all that almost being killed business. There's a few events that we don't see depicted on screen that bridge MI3 to the 2011 film Ghost Protocol from Do the Bartman director Brad Bird. He's made some other things too. After being on the fence about staying with the IMF or joining the private sector, Ethan realized that even if he's retired, his enemies are still out there and Julia's life will always be in danger because of it. While the couple are in Croatia, Agent William Brandt is assigned to keep an eye on them and believes he failed after Julia is killed, and Ethan knocks off 6 Serbians in cold blood as retaliation.
Local police found her body 3 days later. What was left of her anyway.
This whole event was actually staged as a way to fake Julia's death to put her into witness protection, and also get Ethan inside of Rankow prison to track down Bogdan, who we'll talk about in just a little bit. There's no hard dates on when any of this officially took place, but we're going to leave Ethan behind bars for a minute and head to Budapest in January of 2011, where we run into the biggest problem with this film, the font choice. Helvetica, Brad? Come on. We join IMF agents Jane Carter, Trevor Hannaway, and new field agent Benji Dunn, who are on the trail of a courier who's transporting Russian nuclear launch codes. Hannaway makes the grab and momentarily gets away before he's perforated by Sabine Moreau, an assassin who works for Diamonds, not unlike Mr. Freeze. There's no hard date that we could find that explains how long Ethan's been bouncing rocks inside a Russian prison cell, but during the time he's been in there, things have gotten pretty rocky at the IMF, including their self-destruct devices. The situation is so bad, in fact, that the secretary has requested the release of Ethan via jailbreak to track down the launch codes before they land in the hands of an extremist named Cobalt. Ethan, Carter, and Benji are then sent to infiltrate the Kremlin to discover Cobalt's real identity, and things go bad. After avoiding being taken in by Russian detectives, Ethan is picked up by the secretary with Agent Brandt in tow, and we learn that Cobalt's name is Kurt Hendricks, and that Ethan is really good at drawing portraits on his hand. I mean, yeah, it doesn't look perfect, but you try doing that in like 20 seconds on a sweaty palm in the back of a car. Russia is understandably miffed after the whole Kremlin explosion thing, and the secretary informs Ethan that
The president has initiated Ghost Protocol.
He said it. The secretary prepares to help Ethan get away before their car is lit up by Russian authorities, killing the secretary and forcing Ethan and Brandt to hop a train where they're almost rousted by the bulls. The team learns that Moreau is on her way to Dubai to sell the stolen launch codes to Cobalt's associate Winstrom, and the team formulates a switcheroo to get a hold of the codes at the Burj Khalifa. Things immediately hit a snag when the team needs to access the hotel's computer servers, and the only way to get in is up. And on top of that, a sandstorm is rolling in, and the mask machine is broken. I really like when they use the masks. The deal goes belly up, along with Moreau getting punted out of a window by Carter. and Ethan loses Windstrom in the sandstorm despite how good he is at running. Also, for seemingly no reason at all, Cobalt was in disguise as his own henchman. That part's weird. After the botched heist, Ethan's been making secret little phone calls this whole time and sets up a meeting with who was supposed to be Max from all the way back in the first film, as both the nearly identical ski masks and Brad Bird tells us.
We thought we were gonna get her, so we were setting that up.
Yeah, well, I was gonna say, how close to that?
Well, our friends at Paramount did not want to pay Vanessa Redgrave.
Okay.
What Vanessa Redgrave rightly deserves.
Right.
And so after teeing up Vanessa Redgrave, we couldn't get Vanessa Redgrave.
Due to budget restrictions, Ethan has actually been chatting with his buddy Bogdan, who introduces him to the shadowy arms dealer named The Fog.
I always wanted to come here and kind of own this town.
No, that's the Velvet Fog. There we go. The Fog informs Ethan that Cobalt has headed to Mumbai to commission an old Soviet satellite as a means of launching a nuclear attack.
Certainly cannot tell you that Russia quietly sold an obsolete technical satellite to a certain telecom in Mumbai.
Ethan and Carter get dressed to the nines, play tricks on Anil Kapoor, and Ethan chases down Cobalt to the craziest parking garage you've ever seen. Cobalt activates the launch sequence and then just says, "F it."
No!
Ethan is fortunately able to deactivate the warhead and send it crashing into the water, even if it didn't go exactly as he planned it.
Mission accomplished!
With nuclear disaster averted, Ethan heads back to the US and meets up with Luther, where they indulge in some product placement.
You actually said that out loud. Mission accomplished.
Before Luther rolls out and Ethan tells Brent the truth about the unsanctioned hit in Croatia.
So we're good.
We're good.
Ethan and a very much alive Julia then share a moment from a distance before Ethan walks off into the foggy Seattle night, and we get our first mention of the Syndicate.
Now an emerging terror organization known as the Syndicate has control of our entire drone fleet. Their targets unknown.
There's a few events with no precise dates to go off of in regards to the Syndicate and its formation. We can't pinpoint exactly when, but we know the Syndicate was formed under the supervision of MI6 Chief Attlee, a name most likely inspired by former British Prime Minister Clement Attlee. I don't know why I know that. And speaking of prime ministers, the Syndicate only existed as an idea until British Prime Minister Tom Hollander put the kibosh on it.
It would have made me judge, jury, and executioner with zero accountability. I rejected the proposal unequivocally.
Undeterred by a direct order, Attlee goes rogue nation and creates the Syndicate in secret. The Syndicate is essentially a shadow organization made up of former covert operatives of other countries who are given cover identities and no guardrails. Sometime between 2011 and 2013, former SIS operative Solomon Lane is put in charge of the Syndicate, and in 2013, MI6 agent Ilsa Faust joins the Syndicate under the direction of Attlee.
Ilsa Faust, Prime Minister, she disappeared 2 years ago.
Now, if you consult some Mission Impossible wikis, there's unsourced entries that state that Mission Commander Swanbeck was working with the Syndicate all the way back in 1999 to get a hold of the Chimera virus.
Chimera.
But when Hunt destroyed the virus, the Syndicate in turn destroyed Swanbeck. But that's all bull. Never happened.
Do you have any idea what the hell he's talking about?
Nowhere in any of the film's R commentaries is this confirmed. For all we know, Swanbeck is still alive and well in Spain. Back at the end of Ghost Protocol, Ethan is informed that the Syndicate has hacked into American military servers and has taken control of apparently every single drone. Seems bad.
The Syndicate has control of our entire drone fleet.
After all of that shoe leather, we're finally able to link back up with Ethan and company in the 2015 barn burner that is Rogue Nation. Written and directed by the man who will steer the IMF ship for the foreseeable future, Christopher McQuarrie. On assignment in Belarus, Ethan, Benji, and Luther are tracking a plane that's carrying a deadly nerve toxin which is being transported by Chechen separatists. After some truly bonkers stunt work which required crews to wear contact lenses made of glass to avoid being killed by debris,
it would be traveling at the speed of a bullet.
If that goes into my eye, it's going to go through my eye. And we're also concerned about bird strikes.
Ethan gets aboard the plane and swipes the payload DB Cooper style, and we link back up with him in London at the coolest IMF safe house in the entire franchise. It's there he gets his next mission and comes face to frowny face with Solomon Lane, and we get a bit of a hiccup in the timeline. Turns out the safe house is more of a harm house, and the Syndicate has compromised the record store and ID'd Ethan.
Because we are the Syndicate, Mr. Hunt, and now we know who you are.
According to the message from the Syndicate, Ethan has been tracking them for about the past year.
IMF suspects this to be the same shadow organization you have been tracking for the last year.
Which, if he got right to work right after having beers with Luther, that would put us around 2013. But we know that the events of Rogue Nation take place in 2015 because Halo 5 wasn't released until October 27th of that year. Very unlikely Benji got an early copy just because he works at the CIA. Speaking of which, Brandt is fighting for the future of the IMF against the High Council of the CIA, who think that masks and gadgets and extreme stunts are silly relics. This is the same government agency that made exploding cigars, and at one point tried to invent a literal heart attack gun that would shoot ice bullets filled with poison. I'm not joking. Ethan wakes up in a Maplethorpe photo shoot, and we're introduced to Ilsa the Pitbull Faust for the first time on screen. After some Cirque du Soleil routines and leg fighting, Ilsa helps Ethan escape, and the hits just keep coming when Ethan finds out from Brandt that the CIA has shut down the IMF, just as Ethan has confirmed the existence of the Syndicate.
The Syndicate is real. They know who we are, how we operate.
With no other options other than to go into hiding and continue his hunt for the Syndicate, Ethan vanishes from the CIA sites for 6 months until they track him down in Cuba, where he's been doing push-ups and wearing fake beards. Of course, Ethan's one step ahead of the CIA and makes contact with Benji via some fake opera tickets to help him trap Lane, but Ilsa and 2 other Syndicate goons are there to kill the Austrian Chancellor with flute guns. Ethan intercepts Ilsa, and the Syndicate always gets their man when they still blow up the Chancellor as he leaves the opera, just one of dozens of global attacks the Syndicate has been carrying out. After swapping secrets and lipstick, Ethan and Benji meet Ilsa in Casablanca to steal a ledger full of Syndicate agent names, and we get my favorite mask scene in the entire franchise.
Here in the mirror.
Okay, those aren't my hands.
That's not Tom Cruise on the left. That's Tom, and there's not really a mirror there. We built 2 sets.
After a truly bonkers underwater scene, Ethan manages to swap out the security cards just in time for Benji to get through, and he hits a bit of a snag when he dies for a minute or 2.
Whoa. Are you okay to drive? I mean, a minute ago you were dead.
What are you talking about?
That gives Ilsa time to escape with the ledger as she's chased down by the Syndicate and Ethan. These movies are so fucking good. With Ilsa out in the wild with the ledger,
Of course I made a copy.
the boys head to London to intercept Lane from kidnapping the British Prime Minister, get Atlee to admit he's a backstabbing douche nozzle who let Solomon Lane off the leash.
That's also true.
Oh, and Luther decrypts the ledger, which isn't actually names of Syndicate agents, but is actually access codes to $2 billion in British pounds from Atlee.
Instructions to access these funds are as follows.
Solomon Lane needs that money because he's a broke bitch that can't keep the Syndicate afloat. He takes Benji hostage and straps a First Reform vest on him, but can't detonate it because Ethan has him literally by the wallet.
Where's the disc? You're looking at it. I memorized it. All 2.4 billion in numbered accounts. Without me, you're nothing.
After popping some henchmen and booking it across London, Ethan lures Lane into a terrarium trap where he's hotboxed, and composer Joe Kramer just goes to f***ing town on the score. It rules. Everyone's happy at the end of the day. Lane is in custody, the Syndicate is broke, and the IMF is back in action with Hunley as the new secretary.
Welcome to the IMF, Mr. Secretary.
There's a 2-year gap between the IMF capturing Lane and where we pick back up with Ethan, who is hiding out in Belfast and learning that despite their leader being in a turtle tank, the Syndicate didn't fold, but has become a splinter group named the Apostles.
The remnants of this extremist splinter cell refer to themselves as the Apostles.
Even worse, the Apostles are attempting to buy plutonium, which is always a bad situation. Just ask Doc Brown. Ethan, Benji, and Luther attempt to break up the sale in Berlin, but it goes sideways and the Apostles make off with the plutonium for their client, a mysterious terrorist known only as John Lark. The fellas bounce back by kidnapping Niels de Broek, a nuclear physicist who's been working with the Apostles, and they trick him into giving up information thanks to the raw charisma of Wolf Blitzer.
Did we get it?
Of course we got it.
Told you we get it.
News people need to stop being in movies. Do your job. After letting the plutonium get out in the open, CIA Director Sloan assigns the totally not villainous Agent Augustus Walker to shadow hunt.
My man goes, or no one goes.
And he looks incredibly hot the whole time. It's probably the second best anyone's ever looked in this franchise. Number 1 being Swanbeck, of course.
Espresso? Cappuccino?
Ethan and Walker skydive into Paris to track a man they believe to be John Lark, and it goes great. Load those arms, Henry. Ethan takes a big swing and decides to pretend to be Lark in his meeting with the arms dealer Alana Mitsopoulos, aka the White Widow, aka the daughter of Max from the first movie. And her brother Zola is there too.
Being rude to our guests, Zola.
Ethan convinces the White Widow that he's Lark, and to secure the plutonium from her, she tasks Ethan with extracting Solomon Lane from an armored truck convoy.
My seller's not interested in cash, so if you want the plutonium.
Extract Lane.
This is when we get a glimpse into a possible future where Ethan breaks bad and kills some innocent people during the extraction. But Ethan manages to snatch Lane from the convoy without pulling a Sean Ambrose because he's Ethan Hunt. And he pulls another fast one by smuggling Lane onto a boat with Luther and company and taking him into custody. Hunley shows up, double crosses are exposed.
The deal was simple. I help you frame Hunt. You give me the plutonium.
It's just the job.
Including Walker and his mustache, who reveals that the Apostles have infiltrated the CIA.
The only real threats are in this room, and we have them. Do you?
Yet another IMF secretary is killed, and Tom Cruise breaks his ankle while chasing Henry Cavill. Right? No, I'm not going to show it. Walker then jets to Kashmir with Lane to complete their plan to contaminate a bunch of water supplies across the world, and also bombs. The IMF follows, and what f***ing luck that Julia is right there in the danger zone with Doctors Without Borders. Because of course. Oh, hey Wes Bentley. The boys engage in a copter off while Benji and Ilsa work to defuse the bomb and fight Lane's grumpy ass. Ethan and Walker have it out over a detonator on a mountainside until Ethan tells Walker what his favorite Blues Traveler song is. After all is said and done, Julia is safe, Lane is handed over to the White Widow, Ilsa's record is expunged, and everyone has a good old chuckle about the whole thing.
Please don't make me laugh.
We're almost at the end of our world tour. There's a couple events that fill in space on our timeline between the Apostles being stopped and when we reconvene with Ethan in 2021. While there's no confirmed year on this, the United States and some unnamed world governments began work on an AI defense system, which will become known as
the Entity.
Director Denlinger, head of the National Intelligence Department, deploys a prototype of the Entity against the Russian military submarine Sevastopol.
The mission was merely to sabotage the Sevastopol stealth capability so we could secretly detect her.
In an attempt to hack into the sub's cloaking equipment, just as a fun little goof, a silly little thing to do. By doing so, the Entity makes contact with something inside a chamber aboard the submarine that causes the Entity to become fully sentient, and then causes the Sevastopol to fire a torpedo on itself on February 29th of 2020. I know I said earlier that the release year of these movies mostly lines up with their events on the timeline, but the last leap year before 2024 was in 2020. Sometime after the sinking of Sevastopol, and before Ethan is contacted for his next mission, Ilsa Faust tracks down a courier in Istanbul who has one half of a key that is necessary to destroying the Entity. But nobody really knows that yet, or they're acting like they don't.
And what does it unlock?
Not exactly sure.
Judging by some flashbacks in the Final Reckoning trailer, we'll find out who exactly dug all those frozen dead Russians out of the ice. But we pick back up in 2021 as Ethan is delivered his next mission via DoorDash. Ethan's tasked with tracking down Ilsa and the half of the key that she's in possession of, but he's not the only one looking for her. Ilsa, now wanted by pretty much every government body on Earth, even Santa Costa, is hiding out in the Arabian desert as the hit squad bears down on her. Ethan and Solid Faust fold the mercenaries like laundry, and Ethan tells Ilsa,
"You're dead! You stay dead!"
Ilsa gives Ethan her half of the key, and both of them fall off the grid. With both halves of the key out in the wind, high-ranking members of the RNO, DIA, JSOC, etc. get together with director Nerdlinger so he can get a grip on what the IMF is.
You just leave word for a nameless man and hope he gets the job done. Is that it?
And we get the return of Eugene Kittredge, who is now director of the CIA, replacing Erica Sloan.
Who the hell is this guy? That's classified. I'm the damn director of national intelligence. What exactly is it I'm not supposed to know about?
Denlinger also learns how the IMF works and why you should never ever sleep when the hunt is on. Ethan learns about the potential buyer with the potential second half of the key, and before you know it, Ethan, Benji, and Luther are on their way to Abu Dhabi to intercept the sale, with Colonel Jasper Briggs and Agent Degas on their tail. No relation to the other Colonel Briggs. I love that the IMF has basically driven Colonel Briggs insane to the point that he thinks Ethan is some type of cryptid.
A mind-reading, shape-shifting incarnation of chaos. Do not consider him secure unless you have driven a wooden stake through his open heart.
Ethan and the team are then intercepted themselves by a very impressive thief named Grace, no last name, who was hired by a mysterious client to steal both halves of the key. And on top of all of that, we're reintroduced to Gabriel, played by Isai Morales, or as we all know him, Ripper from Free Jack. Maybe just me. Last time we saw Gabriel was very briefly back in 1993 when he killed a woman named Marie who was very close to Ethan and then had Ethan framed, yada yada cyber coffin. The mysterious Gabriel is working with the entity, acting as its salt and pepper protector and its Metatron in a sense.
You're not Interpol.
I am if I wish to be. I can be anything, and I know everything.
The entity plays games with Benji and tricks him into defusing a fake nuclear device as a way to identify Benji, but mostly Ethan.
It knows who I am.
Which is important because the only person the entity sees as a threat to its existence is Ethan Hunt.
There is no place on Earth where you or your god will be safe from me.
I'd be so flattered if like a computer god was like, you're the only one who can stop me. Like, oh, me? No, stop. Okay. The buyer buys the farm, Grace swipes the real half of the keys, and Ethan sees a ghost that causes the fellows to cut and run. Literally. The entity puts everyone in a rough spot, cut off from most modern technology with a vengeful algorithm controlling basically every camera and computer on the planet. Even the CIA has to switch to old satellites to avoid being taken over.
Gave him to the National Weather Service 20 years ago. This is the last one still functioning.
Grace gets stopped at Italian customs before Ethan shows up and flexes his linguistics degree.
Grazie, gente. Prego.
I'm sticking with the theater major background for Ethan. That's what's true in my heart. Grace runs off, Ethan chases Grace, and both are chased down by the assassin Paris, who, despite being French, drives like she's from New Jersey. I'm from New Jersey, it's okay, I can say that. There's just so much great physical comedy and old Hollywood references that McHugh and the team weave throughout this entire movie. It's beautiful stuff.
Wait, what?
Turns out that Grace was anonymously hired by the White Widow and attends a party while dressed like David Bowie in Labyrinth. And we know that the IMF never turns down a reason to get dressed up. All parties finally meet under the watchful eye of the entity, which looks a lot like Windows Media Player. The entity, through Gabriel, tells Double Dubs that she will meet him aboard the Orient Express in the Austrian Alps in a few hours and sell him her half of the key, which she agrees to because all-seeing computer god.
Lana.
I'm sorry.
Ethan, Grace, and Ilsa bail on the party and are separated, which the entity takes full advantage of as Ethan tries to find Grace.
Ethan, our comms have been breached. You're talking to the entity.
Ethan gets caught up in some leg fighting and Gabriel catches Grace on the bridge, but she's saved by Ilsa, who sadly meets her end at Gabriel's hand. Boo! Boos all around. Boo! You're gonna give Ilsa a sword cane and then kill her off a minute later? It's rude. It's rude to do. While mourning the loss of Ilsa at a safe house, Ethan comes up with their gambit to swipe the keys from the train, and informs Grace about the choice now that she's thrown her lot in with the self-destruct boys.
The same choice we're offering you now.
Which is?
To come with us.
And be a ghost.
The plan for Ethan and Grace to pose to the Mistopoulos siblings goes up in smoke when the mask machine breaks, with only Alana's mask being finished. This also leads to my only other gripe in this movie. Somehow, nobody comments when Alana's eyes go from Ice Wizard to Owl Lady. Those are huge fucking peepers. But I digress. The plan then becomes for Grace to swipe the key, and Ethan has to pull an audible and gets aboard the train via a mountain jump. Which, let's all really just bask in that moment for a second, shall we? It turns out that literally everyone is on the train. Gabriel, Paris, the Crime Twins, Agent Briggs and Degas, Kittredge, Doc Brown maybe, as well as Denlinger's shady ass. The DNI director is on board to make a deal with Gabriel for shared control of the entity, since Denlinger is the only person who knows the secret that the entity's source code is still aboard Sevastopol and is the algorithm's biggest weak point.
We both know what the key opens, and we both know the secret to controlling the entity.
Gabriel responds to this by shucking open Denlinger's throat. Maybe don't threaten a guy who clearly lacks any type of people skills and sleeps in whatever the f this is. I need to know more about the cyberbed. Gabriel also turns his knife on Paris, since according to him,
you will betray us. And you'll tell Ethan Hunt everything you've learned. Because he spared your life.
Meanwhile, Grace is chased down for half of the key after her mask ruse falls apart. Where's Ethan during all of this? Ethan follows Gabriel to the roof of the runaway train and gets Glock blocked by Briggs, which gives Gabriel the window to land perfectly in his getaway truck as the bridge the train is headed towards is set to blow. With Gabriel on the lam and the train with no brakes, all hope seems lost, but Ethan, like the artful dodger himself, swiped the key from Gabriel and stuck him with a Zippo. I tried to come up with an Oliver joke somewhere in there, but nothing really worked. Briggs and Degas help rescue the passengers of the runaway train, which gets very, very hairy for Ethan and Grace as they work their way through the most intense escape room of all time. It does seem like a wrap on old Ethan Hunt until Paris, who did not die, lends him a hand to safety. Still wanted by the CIA and with only one speed wing in their carry-on, Ethan jumps from the train leaving Grace with Kittredge, who will give her the choice of joining the IMF family. There we go, we got there. Ethan soars down to the ground to link up with Benji as Kittredge narrates about the mountain of strife that's headed their way.
But that's the pattern, isn't it? The cross you've been left to bear.
I love the way Henry Czerny says pattern.
Pattern.
I want to spread that on toast. Ethan and Benji with both halves of the key drive off to who knows where, while the heart of the entity sits and waits at the bottom of the ocean like an all-knowing, all-seeing Godzilla. And that's where the timeline ends. For now, of course. It's an action-packed, adrenaline-spiking, death-defying, cake-enjoying journey through the Mission Impossible universe. If Final Reckoning lives up to its title, and it is the final mission for Ethan and the team, man, it's been one hell of a ride. Thank you so much, you absolute lunatic.
We'll see the movies!
But tell me, what do you think? What's your favorite Mission Impossible movie? Are there any other movie universes you want us to take a deeper dive into? And how f***ing hyped are you to see Final Reckoning on the biggest screen you could possibly find? I'm gonna have 2 hot dogs. Let us know in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. Hit that like button. And for more videos that won't self-destruct in 5 seconds, choose to keep it glued to Nerdist.com. Ba-da-da.